Hey, welcome to another episode of Culture Cast with host Dustin Homan. Dustin works with Purdue University, in which he's been actively involved with many of the different 4-H programs while at Ohio State University and at Purdue. Dustin today has invited a guest, Mary Buehler. She's a recent graduate with the Ohio State University in Agriculture, Business and Applied Economics. And she had the opportunity to go see Bangladesh for a couple months. So Dustin, it's always a pleasure watching you give us a world tour.
Well, thanks, Patrick. It's good to see you. And I want to thank our guest, Mary. Mary and I grew up in the same town, and it's just amazing how worlds continue to collide. We now live just a state apart, but I'm glad that she's here. So Mary, thank you for being here and welcome to Culture Cast.
Thanks, Dustin.
So I wanted to start things off today before we get into Mary's story and some of her great photos with just a little recap and look back on where we've been. Patrick, by my count, we've done at least 22 of these Culture Casts over the past few years, and I think it's important to celebrate that, and especially to celebrate our viewers that have been tracking along with us. So this map shows in all the countries that are in green are countries that we have featured on Culture Cast in the past. You'll notice I had to add a little clip art block down here because this map did not come with Antarctica, but we had two interviewees who talked about an amazing trip they had to Antarctica through a very unique Ohio State study abroad program. So again, over 22 countries that we visited, and we're about to add number 23, which is Bangladesh. And you'll see that highlighted in red here on the screen. So folks, Mary's going to show us some beautiful photos, but as we always do, I want to kick things off with just a little bit of background to help you locate Bangladesh and provide you with a little bit of data about the country. So Bangladesh is a country that's located in southern Asia, just east of India, and you'll see that here on the map. We always like to feature the flags of our different countries. Unfortunately, the Olympics were postponed in 2020, but hopefully we'll be able to see these flags very soon once the Olympics get back underway. But this is the Bangladeshi flag. And just a few quick facts about Bangladesh. Its capital is Dhaka. You'll see that in the lower right-hand portion of your screen. The population is about 163 million people, so it's about half the size of the United States, and it has a very unique history. I'd encourage our viewers to Google it and read a little bit more about it, but in a nutshell, it used to be part of a former British colony or area that broke away, and originally was part of Pakistan. Pakistan is on the opposite side of India, but over time, they declared their own independence and named themselves Bangladesh, which in their native Bengali language stands for the country of Bengal. That's the people call themselves Bengalese. So Mary, enough of me boring our viewers with the data. Let's get into your photos. Mary, first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, Dustin, I grew up in Anna. Spent a lot of my time working with my 4-H club and in FFA, and that brought me to Ohio State to major in agribusiness and applied economics. Been fortunate enough to graduate this year, which is exciting, and now I'm making the move out to Illinois to work with Illinois Farm Bureau. But to celebrate my last year in college for spring break, I wanted to do something a little different and take part in an alternative break trip, and that's what brought me to Bangladesh. This trip was focused on food transparency within the dining services program at Ohio State.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about that. You had mentioned beforehand that this was a new program. So what was the purpose of this study abroad?
Yeah, Ohio State wants to make sure that its students are aware of where their food is being sourced from and what the processes are that are used in both the growing, processing, and transporting of their food. So as a part of that, they're going to start having more of these type of trips where they're taking students to places where Ohio State is actually getting some of our food. So in Bangladesh, we went to Kazi and Kazi Tea Farm, or how we know it in the United States is Titulia Tea, which is where Ohio State gets all their tea from.
This map shows us approximately where you were in the country of Bangladesh. So as we're getting into this, first of all, tell us, how did you feel about going to Bangladesh? I mean, had you ever been to this part of the country before, or the world?
I'd never been to this part of the country, so I'd only been out of the country once before this. I went to Brazil, but I'd never been anywhere else other than the United States. I was excited. Most of my other family members were scared because most of them didn't even know where Bangladesh was. We eventually figured it out. But on this map, you can see I was in the northern part of Bangladesh. So we actually flew into India and then walked over the border by foot, which I felt like was probably a little different. But yeah, we walked across by foot into Bangladesh, and then you can see in the past map, we were in the top region of
the Rangpur area, if that's I'm saying it correctly. Okay.
Yep.
And I was fast forwarding to, it is an interesting way to enter a country, to fly into another country and then walk across to the country that you mean to go to. But you saw something very interesting as part of that process. Tell us about this photo.
Yeah, every day when they're going to close the border between India and Bangladesh at the various border crossings, they have a ceremony. So in the top picture, you can see the India soldiers, which are more towards the back of the picture in the tan uniforms, and the Bengali soldiers who are more in the darker camo uniforms. So there's about 10 or 12 of them doing a ceremony, and then the flags came down, and it draws a big crowd to watch this ceremonious closing.
And did it seem to be like a celebratory or a joyous ceremony? I mean, you've got, soldiers from different countries doing this together. What was the feeling of it?
It seemed like a lot of people who were just really proud of where they came from. So we heard both of their anthems. We saw the soldiers there being very civil. They shook each other's hands multiple times in it. So yeah, I would say overall pretty happy vibes going on at the border closing.
And you mentioned to us before this recording that this was not the only spectacle at this event. Tell us about that.
So we were in northern Bangladesh, which is not near the big cities. Most of the big cities that people know Bangladesh for are in southern Bangladesh, very rural area, not a lot of tourists. So people weren't used to seeing Americans. So we were quite the spectacle ourselves. Everyone wanted to take selfies. It was nice to meet the people.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think I appreciate you sharing that story, because for many of us, we grow up in areas where we are used to seeing people from different cultures, and that's not the case everywhere in the world. So it's one of the reasons that we do this culture cast. So let's get into the purpose of your trip was visiting this tea plantation. So tell us about the plantation and then what we see here.
Yeah, so Kazi and Kazi Tea Farm, this is a picture from their estate. So the building in the back is where me and the 7 other girls that I went there with is where we stayed. So the estate is actually known in the surrounding countries for being a really nice retreat area for military officials. So it's a very well maintained estate, but they're also known for their community development, specifically within Bangladesh, which is more so why we were there, is to learn about that community development and also the organic tea that they grow.
This looks like something out of National Geographic. I mean, tell me about your mornings. Like, what were your mornings like? Did you just wake up to like the sound of, beautiful songbirds? This is majestic.
So beautiful songbirds, you kind of on the right track. They kind of have a really squeaky noise to them. But yeah, birds, it was beautiful. It was very tranquil. They had 3 horses that just roamed the tea estate. So 2 beautiful white horses, 1 sorrel horse, just roaming around, minding their own business, looking beautiful all day. But yeah, this is what we woke up to every morning.
This is just incredible, Marion. Like you were saying, the urban areas on to the south, I think when I think about Bangladesh, that's what I think about, and never would have had a photo like this come up in my mind. So I think it's very interesting. You know, we always try to focus on food and agriculture, with South Centers being part of the College of Food, Ag, Environmental Sciences. So you got to see a little bit of that. Tell us what you got to do when you're at the tea estate.
Yeah, so they have around 1,200 acres of tea on their tea estate, and they wanted to teach us more about the plants. So after we went through learning how the plants grow and how long they tend to live, they attempted to teach us how to pick tea, which sounds like an easy task, but it's really, really hard. So in this picture, I'm with one of their longtime tea pickers. She really knew what she was doing. I really didn't know what I was doing. And we spent probably 30 minutes just on that one plant trying to figure out what leaf I was supposed to pull and what leaf I wasn't supposed to pull, because we also ran into a communication barrier where we realized this is not yes in Bangladesh, but this is no. So yes in Bangladesh is like this, which was really confusing for me because no one told me that. So we were both trying to communicate on what leaves to pull, but I never knew if she was saying yes or no or sure. But we eventually figured it out, and I learned that tea pickers, that's not a job to look down upon. They really had to know what they're doing, and it's really important that they pick the right leaves to make sure that the plant can keep growing, but also as they pick leaves, they're pruning to make sure that the plant stays about waist high, because then that makes it so the tea leaf pickers don't have to bend over, because that causes a lot of strain on their back. It's just more comfortable to keep it all at the same height. So they're not only picking, but they're pruning at the same time.
That is fascinating. I was going to ask you why everything was so well manicured, but that would help to explain it. Now, I noticed there's some of the leaves seem to be a little bit greener than the others. Was that a factor that played into which of them were picked?
Part of it, yep. So the lighter green leaves are the top leaves. You usually didn't pick the lower dark green leaves. But it was also looking for making sure that there was enough of a new shoot before you picked it. I wasn't a good tea picker, so I wish I could tell you more than that, but it was just so much to take in at once at how to know which leaf to pick.
This is why we encourage young people to do job shadowing and internships, right? You get a little taste of it and figure out if you were made for this kind of career or not. So once you've picked these leaves, they have to go somewhere. Tell us about that process.
Yeah, so we visited their tea processing facility. This is where we started. So these big troughs, for lack of a better word, they were about the length of a football field. This is the starting process for black tea. So something I didn't realize is black tea and green tea are made from the same leaves, but it's how they're processed that makes them different. So black tea, the leaves are left out to dry. I think it was 15 hours, but don't quote me on that. But they're left out to dry, where green tea, it just goes straight into processing. So this is a picture of the starting process of their black tea.
Did they tell you then, how does the black tea come to have some caffeination in it?
That's a good question, Dustin. So when we were touring the processing center, some of the machines were on, and we were with more people than you can see in that picture. So a lot of it was either lost in not being able to hear, but also lost in translation. So we didn't always get those fine details.
That's just really interesting, though. I would have thought green and black tea would have been different species, or, you know.
It's all the same leaves.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So what are they doing? Are they drying here?
Yep.
Okay. And then once they're dried, I assume something happens here, right?
Yeah, so there's a few machines that are in between the first step and then this step, but basically there's two different methods for making black tea, but it has to do with how the leaves are basically tore up. So you can tear, cut, and press leaves, or you can basically pulverize leaves, which that's not the technical terms for them, but that's how they were explained to help us understand. So these leaves on the tarp are about to go into those round machines that are kind of blue behind it, where a worker actually turns them. It kind of looked like they were doing a dance move, but then it grinds them between two big stones, basically.
Okay. Does that affect the tea flavor? Did they tell you the way that it's torn apart?
I'm not sure.
Interesting. But are they doing all of this on the estate?
So this is not on the estate, but it's pretty close.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you know, does the estate own this processing facility?
I believe so, but I'm not 100% for sure.
This is fascinating. I mean, think about like U.S. agriculture, especially with our row crops. You know, farmers grow it and then it's shipped off somewhere else to be processed. And it looks like you got to see kind of all that happen.
Yeah.
Right near the point of origin. So just an different system. All right. So the tea was very interesting, but this by far is our favorite topic of CultureCast, and that is the food. So we appreciate you sharing 3 different photos for us. Walk us through these, Mary, as to what your daily dining looked like.
Yeah. So the first 2 photos that have more colors on them, those are just a normal lunch or dinner. So at the tea estate, we were lucky to have our own cook there who was cooking for us. And something about Bangladesh, if you've never been there, they have really spicy food. Kind of like India food, how it's really spicy or known for being really spicy. So is Bengali food. Rice is a staple. There were usually a lot of vegetables that were sauteed up with some really hot spices. I'm personally not a fan of hot things, so these are some of the more milder foods that we were offered. Many people in Bangladesh are vegetarians or pescatarians, so we were usually served fish or just a big variety of different vegetables. Eggplants, fried eggplants were one of my favorite. And at the top of the center plate, you can see 2 little cubes. That's fried cheese.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How was it?
It was really good. That was one of my favorites.
What are these brown discs that are on the first 2 photos?
Fried eggplant.
That's fried. Okay.
Yeah.
And then on this last photo, there's a darker kind of U-shaped thing. What is that?
So that whole bowl is desserts.
So tell us more about that. I'm very intrigued.
Desserts are amazing. So they make like really spicy food, but they like really sweet desserts. So the 2 goopier liquidy ones are homemade yogurt. So they had 2 different flavors of homemade yogurt. The darker brown dessert that you pointed out that's like U-shaped, it was actually cut in half. So it looked like a big bean, basically. I don't know what it was, but it tasted like brown sugary deliciousness. It was really good, but I didn't know what it was.
Just a quick question. Is there much meat in their diet?
You know, we were always offered meat, but I think that's because we were at the tea estate and they were doing something special for us. But I did notice when we drove through the markets, I don't think meat is a normal for most of the villagers in the area I was in. None of them have refrigeration. So if you saw meat in the markets, it was just laying out on a wooden slab. And there usually wasn't very much of it. And if I had to guess, it was probably pretty pricey. But many of the villagers also had their own goats, and a lot of them had cattle. So I'd say probably some meat, but if I had to guess, it's probably not as much as what we're used to in the U.S.
But clearly they're eating some of the product from their cattle with the cheese and the yogurt that you mentioned here, right? So
yeah.
And then so rounding out this plate, the 2 like dough balls that are different colors. Do you know what those were?
We called them the dough balls, but our chef did not know any English.
Okay.
But one of the professors that was with us knew Bengali, so they could talk a little bit, but I don't remember for the life of me what those actually were. I just know they were very good.
You know, one thing that surprises me is that your plate is not overflowing. Did you feel full after these meals?
Yeah. I felt like we never stopped eating there.
Interesting. Was it a multi-course meal typically?
Dinner tended to have 2 courses, but yeah, between breakfast, lunch, and dinner, having heavy rice or tortillas, I felt like that filled me up pretty well. I also partook in desserts every time. But something that I forgot to mention at the beginning is in Bangladesh, it's custom to eat with your hands there, which I was really thrown off by because a lot of the foods on my plate, when I look at them, I'm like, oh, I'd use a fork. But we used our hands the first time, so we were fortunate they let us use silverware after that because we weren't there long enough to really be immersed too much into the culture. But the first night we did eat all our food with our hands, which was a lot harder than it sounded to get all the rice and everything to stick together so you could get it to your mouth.
Makes me think of our twin boys. We had rice last night, and watching them trying to use their hands to get in their mouth, like I can empathize with you now after watching them. So, but I'm glad you did. I think that's an important, it's an important piece when you visit a new culture to try some of those things that are part of their culture but uncomfortable to us. So thank you for sharing this. You shared some of these photos are going to talk about a really unique program that you've shared with us. And so Mary, tell us about this.
Yeah, so Kazi and Kazi Tea Estate is really invested in community development and specifically women empowerment. So in Bangladesh, women aren't often given the same rights or seen as equals to men. But through Kazi and Kazi, they gift dairy cattle to women in the local area who are low income or homeless and teach them how to raise those dairy cattle. They do dairy cattle because Kazi and Kazi needs the fertilizer to put on their tea plants because they're all about being one unit, being self-sustaining in themselves. When they grew too big, they needed more cattle, and that's why they started this program. But through that empowerment of gifting these ladies dairy cattle, they also have to sign a contract with their significant other that the woman is the farm owner. And we actually got to meet some of the lady farmers who had been gifted dairy cattle, and they said it created a huge dynamic shift in their family. So it's unfortunate that before that they were experiencing verbal and physical abuse, but they said when they made that shift to finally becoming a contributor to the income, then their husbands saw them as equals, they respected them, and it was really helping take a lot of families from being homeless or living in one of those grass huts to now they're able to get something that was more made out of concrete and a lot more safe for them and their family to live in.
Oh, sorry. And it wasn't just the cattle, right, that they were using to invest in the families as well. Tell us about this photo.
Yeah, so Kazi and Kazi also set out to employ a lot of women, which often it's hard for women, particularly in rural Bangladesh, to find jobs. So all these women in this picture are in their late 40s, and they all work as tea pickers for Kazi and Kazi. But because they, due to many circumstances, hadn't been able to receive education yet in their life, Kazi and Kazi hired a teacher, who's the lady standing up in the yellow, who is teaching them the Bengali and American alphabet, who's teaching them how to write and teaching them how to count. That way they can more effectively communicate in the marketplace. And this is a biodigester that was gifted from the farm to one of the ladies who now has a large dairy farm, which a large dairy farm there is about 11 cows. She has a large dairy farm, and now she has a biodigester to put the manure in, which fuels the stove in her house, which cuts down on all the smoke and soot that would have normally been in her house.
Well, I appreciate you sharing these, Mary, and it's thinking back to what you said at the beginning of this trip was about transparency and helping students at Ohio State see, the tea that you're drinking, here's the people that are picking it, and here's what that company is doing to invest in the community, I think is really important to share. So we appreciate you sharing that. And Patrick, how are we looking on time?
Well, we have a little bit under 2 minutes to go. And I love the last question that you asked each of our world travelers.
Yeah, of course. And we'll keep it on this. I think this is a good photo to ask that. Mary, I always like to ask people, what would you tell others about visiting Bangladesh and why should they visit?
Well, I hadn't been to many places in the world, so to me, Bangladesh felt like I was visiting a whole new world. It's completely different than anything you'll experience in the United States. And I feel like someone has to go there to truly understand what it's like to live in a different part of the world. To us, it seems really bizarre and strange, but to them, it's normal life, and it's really interesting to learn about it. And the people are just so welcoming of others learning about their culture.
Thanks for sharing that, Mary. And just briefly tell us about this photo as we end on it.
Yeah, while we were out in the village, we stopped by the local preschool, which these students had met the Ohio State folks who were there the year previously. And we gift things to the preschool when we go there, so they're all excited to see the Ohio State folks back again. And many of these students are children of the workers of Kazi and Kazi.
Well, I know we had some more photos, and unfortunately our time is running low, but Mary, I want to thank you for joining us today and for sharing these photos. The time flew. This was so interesting, and I hope that this has encouraged you to keep traveling abroad, and I just hope this story inspires someone to do that as well. So to Patrick and Sarah, Dwayne, our team at South Centers, thanks for having us. We appreciate it. And to all of our viewers out there, thanks for tuning in, and we hope you'll join us next time as we continue to explore this wonderful world that we live in.